In the ancient world, there once stood 7 wonders. 7 monuments to the ingenuity of man. But one by one, the civilizations fell, and those wonders crumbled to dust. Lost in the sands of time, all except one. The Great Pyramid of Giza, 4,500 years old. It's the only ancient wonder of the world still standing, and it's the oldest. It has spawned countless myths, but its real story is one of triumph over impossible odds, extraordinary human ingenuity, and one man's burning ambition to live forever. More than 2,000 years before the birth of Christ, priests prepare a pharaoh to be reborn. They are mummifying his remains so that his body can be reunited with his spirit after death. They remove his organs and solemnly preserve them in sealed jars called canopic vessels. Then coat the rest of his body in wrappings sealed with resin. And at every stage, rituals are performed over the mummy to ensure its safe passage to the afterlife. That afterlife would be reached from the heart of the pharaoh's tomb, deep within the greatest pyramid ever built. To the ancient Egyptians, the pyramid was an engine of rebirth. It was a gateway to the next world, from which the pharaoh's spirit would fly up to the heavens. There, it would look down forever to guard his people. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands on a plateau high above the city of Cairo. It covers an area the size of more than 6 football pitches, and remained the world's largest single structure for more than 4,000 years.
It's just huge. The feeling that one gets actually being on it if you try and climb it is this mass of stone. You're constantly thinking, how did they get it all up here?
The Great Pyramid towered taller than any other stone building made by man until the Industrial Revolution. It emerged out of the sweat and toil of thousands of workers. But its real achievement goes beyond sheer scale. The latest research reveals the Great Pyramid to be a masterpiece of mathematics and of precision engineering. One that involved advanced systems of organization that would help Egypt to become one of the greatest civilizations ever seen.
There's an old Arabic proverb, man fears time, but time fears the pyramids. And the pyramids are there forever.
The word pyramid comes from the Greek word pyramis, which is what the Greeks called the conical bread loaf eaten by the Egyptians. At rock bottom, a pyramid is a giant funeral mound. But to the Egyptians, it was so much more. It was where a pharaoh and his people became immortal. If the pyramid was not completed before the pharaoh's death, his spirit would not ascend to the heavens and chaos would engulf the land.
The people believed that by helping the king to create this monument for eternity, they were ensuring their own survival and the survival of their country.
For as Toby Wilkinson of Cambridge University knows, the Egyptian pharaoh was more than just a king.
In Egyptian religion, the king was not just the head of state, he was also God incarnate. He was seen as not just a very important man, but actually as a semi-divine being, and of critical importance for the continuation of Egyptian civilization.
At the heart of the Great Pyramid lies the tomb of a great pharaoh. It is the centerpiece of a vast city of the dead, which includes satellite pyramids for his queens and tombs for his favored courtiers. A causeway over 1 kilometer long links the complex to a harbor temple on the River Nile. So who was the God King behind the greatest pyramid of them all? Only one image of him survives, this tiny ivory figurine, just 7.5 centimeters high. His name was Khufu.
We know the names of some of Khufu's wives. We know that he had a number of sons who succeeded him on the throne. But actually, beyond those bare facts, we know tantalizingly little about the creator of the Great Pyramid.
We do know that Khufu's family was the first to rule the whole of Egypt, an empire stretching from the Nile Delta to Aswan. The pyramid was an expression of his authority. And one legend suggests that for him, achieving eternal life was an obsession. A 4,000-year-old papyrus describes how, in his old age, Khufu has a wise man brought before him and demands to know the way to the secret shrine of Thoth, god of the afterlife. The wise man cannot help him. This story portrays a pharaoh determined to rule in this world and the next.
The pyramid was a tremendous political statement.
Professor Anne Macy Roth of New York University is convinced the pyramid was in part a status symbol.
It showed the power of the king, a power that was unparalleled anywhere in the past at the time that it was built.
Khufu's father actually had 3 pyramids built before he chose one that reflected his grand status to his satisfaction.
When you look at Egyptian architecture over the centuries, there's always a feeling of one-upmanship.
Dr. Aidan Dodson from the University of Bristol believes that Khufu was compelled to outdo his father.
Every generation, if it has the resources to do so, tries to do something a little bit bigger and better than the previous one.
(2551 BC). The 20-year-old pharaoh Khufu ascends to the throne. One of his first major decisions? To order the most magnificent pyramid ever built. The scene is set for the crucial ritual, which will be the most important act in his reign. He must align his pyramid with the heavens. Before he can do this, his high priest makes the final calculations.
The pyramid was really a resurrection machine for the king. The Egyptians believed that the king's spirit, his eternal life force, would shoot out of the pyramid and join the stars.
This requires extraordinary precision and knowledge of astronomy.
They used a pair of stars that rotate around the pole star. And when those 2 stars were in alignment, you could hold a plumb bob up and create your true north alignment.
It is Khufu himself who marks the line of true north by hammering a peg into the ground with a golden mallet. For this isn't just the routine marking out of a ground plan. It's the ritual that could deliver eternal life for the pharaoh and the survival of his people. The race is on to complete Khufu's Great Pyramid before his death. By demanding the greatest pyramid ever seen, Khufu is taking a giant gamble with his own destiny and his kingdom. Before a single stone is laid, Khufu's engineers have to ensure that the 4 sides of the pyramid will stand at precise right angles to each other. This required a grasp of mathematics unsurpassed till the Greeks 2,000 years later.
The Egyptians had very sound mathematical knowledge, including of geometry. But I think it's fair to say that their geometry was more a question of practicalities than of theory. They were interested in applying geometry to the building of pyramids rather than in abstract notions of geometry as a science.
It's likely that the engineers used a simple but ingenious method of calculating a right angle. Using a cord attached to a post along a lead line, they draw a circle in the sand. Then they make another overlapping circle further along. A line drawn between the points where the two circles intersect will strike the lead line at a perfect right angle. These deceptively simple methods also ensured that the pyramid would rise evenly and uniformly. But the challenge had only just begun. Now that they had set the foundations, they faced a mammoth build. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is built out of more than 2 million limestone blocks. And in a land made up largely of mud and sand, stone was a scarce commodity. But Khufu chose the site for his pyramid wisely, right on top of a limestone plateau. His workers could dig for all the stone they needed just a few hundred meters south of the building site. The quarry stayed in use long after the Great Pyramid was finished. Neat rectangles left in the rock reveal how the workers cut and extracted the stone in ready-to-use blocks more than 4,000 years ago.
This is an interesting place because from here you can understand how stone was quarried on the Pyramid Plateau.
In a similar quarry nearby, Dr. Salima Ikram of the American University in Cairo imagines the scale of the task.
We're left here with the end result of many, many hours of hard labor when people quarried from the top of the plateau all the way down.
Cutting the rock would have been a Herculean task. Workers extracted more than 2.76 million cubic meters of stone, enough to build the Empire State Building more than 6 times over. And to do this, they had only the most primitive of tools.
It's incredibly impressive, the fact that the ancient Egyptians managed to achieve huge monumental stone buildings, because all they really had were hard stone pounders, some sort of copper bronze chisels, wood, and a lot of brute force.
Once the workers had chiseled each stone block, they cut small slots into its base. They probably used these to hammer in wooden wedges to free the stone from the rock face. It would have been a perilous business.
We really have to remember that these were very difficult sites.
Dr. Stephen Harvey, excavator of Egypt's last pyramid, believes accidents would have been a routine occurrence.
What that means is that there was loss of limb and loss of life on a scale that was probably pretty considerable.
But archaeological evidence reveals that the workers enjoyed the very best health plan.
There are some people in the tombs where you know that people had stones dropped on their toes and they were squashed or their arms got broken, but they were set by the pharaoh's physicians so that they could go back to work.
As if extracting stone from the quarry wasn't difficult enough, Khufu's builders also had to transport it onto the building site. Most of the blocks used on the Great Pyramid weigh around 2.5 tons, heavier than your average 4-wheel drive car. There's a clue to how the workers moved them in Egyptian wall paintings. They show gangs of men dragging the colossal stones on sleds. But even with sledges, the workers would still struggle to negotiate the steep sides of the quarry. Modern excavations have provided another piece of the puzzle, uncovering the apparent remains of a giant ramp, more than 300 meters long. It was made of limestone chippings and gypsum mortar, encased in walls of rough stone and clay. Its surface was lined with logs, which the workers would douse with water. This helped them slide the sledge and its heavy cargo up out of the quarry to the pyramid building site. These simple solutions all helped, but a build of this scale still demanded an enormous workforce. Hollywood movies are in no doubt about exactly who made up these toiling masses. For them, the pyramids were built by slaves.
From every corner of the land came teeming multitudes of workers, and then slaves and generations of slaves to wrest the rock from the unyielding earth.
Evidence discovered in the last century reveals that the truth is more complicated. The pyramid workers were not slaves. They were free men recruited from villages all over Egypt. And they agreed to work at Giza because their taxes were due.
It was effectively a form of labor tax. In a country without coinage, without currency, how you paid your tax to the government was to give your own labor for a certain period each year. When the local officials came to demand that you turn up for duty, there was very little escaping that. So they weren't slaves, but I suspect they weren't terribly willing workers either.
The stories of the workforce numbering tens of thousands can also be put to the test. Hieroglyphics reveal that the build took 20 years, so it's easy to do the sums. It's thought that Khufu would have needed some 1,200 quarrymen to cut the stone. After cutting the blocks, they then had to haul them up onto the growing pyramid. Recent experiments show that one man cannot pull more than a third of a ton of stone. It takes 10 men on the rope before the block will even start to move. But upwards of 20 bodies are needed to shift one of these stones with ease. And they had to lay more than 300 blocks a day. That's almost 700 men just dragging stones. Finally, they have to be placed on the growing pyramid. It would take more than 300 men working each day to lever these blocks into position. An enormous workforce would be needed to realize Khufu's dream of immortality. The first challenge would be where to house them. For centuries, this remained a mystery. Then in 1988, just a few hundred feet southwest of the Great Pyramid, came one of the most exciting archaeological finds of recent times, an entire village hidden beneath the sand, specially built to house Khufu's workers. The discovery offered a rare window into workers' lives. The settlement would have been a hive of activity, with cooks slaving over great canteen ovens, carpenters cutting wood for the sleds and runways, and potters making a myriad of vessels required to keep the whole machine running.
There would have been hundreds, thousands of workers jostling together, sleeping side by side, living and working cheek by jowl. It would have been a noisy, dusty, probably quite smelly and uncomfortable place to work.
And these toiling masses had to be fed and watered. Surviving documents reveal that the basic pay of a labourer was 10 loaves of bread and a flagon of beer every day, and other assorted foodstuffs have been discovered at the workers' village site. Multiplied by 2,000, that's a lot of food. In such an arid land, finding the supplies to feed all these people would be a major challenge. The solution would lie on the fertile banks of the Nile. Khufu's officials collected foodstuffs as taxes from communities all along the Nile to be transported to Giza. All this effort was crucial, not just to the pharaoh, but also to his people. Unless the pyramid was completed before he died, Khufu could not join the gods. The sun would set on Egypt forever, and darkness would engulf the world. Organization was the watchword on every aspect of the project. Graffiti from later pyramids reveals the way it was set up. The workers were divided into two large gangs of about 1,000 men. They gave themselves colorful names like the Friends or the Drunkards of Khufu.
No disorganized rabble is going to build a pyramid in a million years. What you need are people who are working as a team, a close-knit team. Probably half of them are related to one another as well.
And the gang system had another advantage.
Probably, if you wanted to get something that is that enormous finished without having a revolt, you had to motivate people in a positive way. Even now, when you're looking at excavations, people do organize their workforce into teams or gangs, and it's a competitive spirit that often makes them work harder and faster.
Maybe it was a way of controlling the work. You could say, well, that gang is, you know, they've moved 25 blocks today and you've only moved 20, and, you know, what's wrong with you guys?
Each gang was divided into 5 groups known as files. These often had names with a nautical flavor like Great and Asiatic, which means starboard and port in Egyptian naval slang. All of these men and their building materials were ferried onto the Giza Plateau via a huge artificial harbor linked to the River Nile by a system of canals. From here, countless cargo ships plied up and down the river day and night. The scale and complexity of the project took a lot of managing.
They had a very intricate way of keeping track of who came, who went, who was paid, when they were paid, because without well-organized bureaucracy and literacy, you wouldn't have been able to construct something like the Great Pyramid.
And it wasn't just the workers the system kept track of. A team of supervisors would paint control notes on the stone blocks. These recorded the block's source and destination, its transport date, and the work gang in charge of it. It all demanded a small army of supervisors, taxmen, scribes, and accountants. In fact, there were at least 10 times as many support staff as there were laborers. That's around 25,000 people working on the project at any one time, more than it takes to run the Pentagon. The scale and ambition of the construction must have put the economy and the people under incredible pressure.
To get the sheer expertise to build the thing, you're going to have to draw on the manpower from the whole of Egypt. So therefore it's bringing people of different backgrounds from all the way down the Nile Valley together in one place, which clearly has social impact.
Pyramid building helped to create a sophisticated national bureaucracy that made Egypt a cohesive state. In fact, the passion for pyramids helped to make Egypt into an ancient superpower.
There's no doubt that the complexity and sophistication of government that were required to build the pyramid also created a great nation that was able to survive for 3,000 years. Without pyramid building, it's doubtful that Egypt would have reached that pinnacle of achievement whereby it could sustain itself as a great civilization.
The genesis of the pyramid building drive actually dates back 100 years before Khufu, to a remarkable man called Imhotep. Imhotep was the high priest and grand vizier of the pharaoh Josiah, and he was tasked with designing the pharaoh's tomb. At the time, pharaohs were buried in rectangular tombs called mastabas. But Imhotep wanted something grander to commemorate his pharaoh. He placed one mastaba on top of another and designed the first pyramid. And it didn't stop there. Once one pharaoh had a pyramid, every pharaoh wanted one, and every pyramid had to be bigger and better than the last. Finally, Khufu's father perfected the classic pyramid shape. But Khufu's grand vision at Giza would mark the zenith of pyramid design. After a decade of toil, the Great Pyramid is rising into the sky at an impressive pace. Khufu's builders are wrestling with the most important task of all, keeping the pharaoh's sacred remains safe from tomb robbers. These raiders invaded royal tombs intent on stealing the riches and even the bejeweled mummies inside. Such a desecration would destroy the pyramid's whole purpose, ending the pharaoh's chances of immortality and endangering the future of his people. To keep it safe from intruders, the pharaoh's burial chamber was traditionally placed beneath his pyramid. But the final location of Khufu's burial chamber poses a riddle that has endured for thousands of years. The evidence shows that Khufu's builders started work on an underground chamber, tunneling over 756 meters through solid rock. The narrow tunnel is just over a meter high, barely big enough for a man to crawl along. And their only equipment for this daunting task? Simple tools. But then, when the burial chamber is almost complete, the work stops. At some point, Khufu orders his workers to construct a second complex of burial chambers right in the heart of the pyramid. This is where Khufu's remains are eventually laid to rest. This apparent change of plan has puzzled Egyptologists for centuries. But one surprise discovery by an archaeologist fueled a dramatic theory. If true, it stands as the most shocking event of Khufu's entire reign. The mystery of Khufu's unused underground burial chamber was revived by a party of archaeologists visiting the Giza Plateau in the 1920s.
A photographer at Giza set up his tripod on what seemed to be limestone, and part of one of the legs of the tripod sunk down off kilter into the earth.
They started clearing it, and finally at the bottom they found a sealed burial chamber.
Archaeologist George Reisner was the first to enter the musty chamber.
Inside was a big alabaster sarcophagus.
He had discovered the tomb of Khufu's beloved mother, Queen Hetepheres. It lay beneath one of the 3 satellite pyramids beside the Great Pyramid, but the archaeologists were in for a surprise.
One of the great mysteries surrounding Hetepheres' tomb is that when they invited the press in, they opened the sarcophagus and found it entirely empty.
There was no mummy, but the tomb was intact and no sign of a break-in. Reisner came up with a theory that might explain the mystery. He suggested Hetepheres died during Khufu's reign and was originally buried elsewhere. But that tomb was raided and her mummy stolen. All that Khufu's priests could do was rebury the empty sarcophagus. Reisner believed that the violation of his mother's tomb turned Khufu's fear of robbers into an obsession and prompted a dramatic redesign of his own pyramid and burial chamber. Modern Egyptologists are more skeptical.
Reisner's reburial theory is very romantic and exciting, but doesn't have a smidgen of evidence to go with it.
What is certain is that the engineer's final design of Khufu's pyramid put his burial chamber right at the heart of the structure. And to protect it, they came up with the most sophisticated security system yet devised. The new design incorporated a grand gallery to conduct the pharaoh's body and his funeral procession to the burial chamber. But after the burial, it needed to be securely sealed. A recently discovered artifact reveals how Egyptian engineers made pyramids secure.
It's really extraordinary the lengths that the builders went to in order to protect the tombs from robbing.
Using a 3D scale model, they devised ingenious systems to plug the passageways with stone and seal off the burial chamber. It also shows how the pyramid designers used surprisingly modern techniques.
In fact, it's not really too different from what architects do today. When you build today, you create a CAD model, a computer model in 3 dimensions, and most frequently, architects will still build a physical model in order to see and find out errors in their planning.
Khufu's redesign would have set his builders a great challenge. But he was about to pile on the pressure even more. He decreed that the burial chamber and internal passageways should be crafted not from limestone, but from ultra-hard granite. This would make it much tougher for raiders to tunnel through. But there was no granite at Giza. It would have to be shipped from the quarries of Aswan, over 900 kilometers away. What's more, as one of the hardest materials on the planet, the builders' copper tools would be useless to cut it. The only alternative called for infinite patience and infinite manpower. The quarrymen used pounders made of dolerite, a stone harder than granite, but progress would have been slow.
We've actually found the tools, and there are masses of them, because you really need that number, because this has to be filled with thousands and thousands of people. And probably a lot of these workers, there have been dust coming out, people would be inhaling it, or they'll be wrapping their faces up, and it really would be quite a busy and frenetic kind of scene, with people perhaps sort of dying from just the dust inhalation.
On the pyramid side too, granite spelled trouble. The roof of Khufu's burial chamber alone weighed an astronomical 400 tons, and his engineers feared that it could give way under the pressure. They had to act fast, or a catastrophic cave-in could destroy all their hard work.
The builders, however, came up with an ingenious and unique solution by creating a series of stress-relieving chambers above and a pent roof on top that directed the weight of the stone out into the core of the pyramid.
In this way, Khufu's engineers ensured that the top of the pyramid would not crush the burial chamber under its weight. With the burial chamber completed, Khufu's pyramid was reaching its final phase. As it rose more than 137 meters into the sky, the workers had to maneuver the giant stone blocks up to ever greater heights. Some sort of ramp seems the likeliest solution, but a single ramp would have to be enormously long to reach the top.
A spiral ramp that wrapped around the pyramid makes a good deal more sense, because you don't have to continually add to the ramp. You just, as you go higher, you just extend it going up in a spiral. The problem with that, of course, is then you can't see the pyramid, so it makes it much harder to lay things, because you've got it covered with a spiral ramp. You can't make sure that it's going up straight, and keeping it from twisting must have been very tricky.
Whatever form the ramp took, as workers reached the very top, they faced the precarious job of manhandling the stone blocks into place.
There would have been very little room at the top of a ramp by the time you got to the apex of the pyramid. And so it's quite possible that levers were used to set in place those last few blocks on the top.
And levering 2 to 3 ton blocks in such a confined space would have been extremely dangerous. As the main building work neared completion, masons would transform this rough pile of stone into a gleaming white monument worthy of a pharaoh.
Here you have this beautiful surface which has been smoothed down, and then you can see where it's slightly bumpy, and here it's not cut away at all. So this is what the block would have looked like. Right at this level is when you would get some sandstone and some sand, and then you'd put it over here and then you grind it down, and then that would smooth it off, and you would wind up with a surface like this one. But a pyramid the size of Khufu's must have taken over a year to smooth down because it is so very massive.
More than 2 decades have passed since the young pharaoh marked out the ground plan of his pyramid, his personal resurrection chamber. Now a team of workers maneuver the most important stone of all into position. The capstone, the apex of the Great Pyramid. Khufu has survived long enough to see his spectacular tomb completed. Now, he need no longer fear death. (2528 BC). The great pharaoh Khufu is dead. This is the day that he has been preparing for, ever since he took the throne 23 years ago. In the mortuary temple at the foot of the Great Pyramid, the chief embalmer transforms the pharaoh's body into a mummy.
The Egyptians believed that after death, it was important that the soul, the spirit of the dead person, should continue to have somewhere to live.
What lies behind it seems to be a belief that for the soul to survive properly in the next world, the body has to survive in this world as well.
The pharaoh's organs must be preserved so that he can use them in the afterlife. The priests intone rituals over Khufu's body. They extract his brain and all his other organs, wash and treat them with natron, a preservative made of salt, and store them in canopic vessels, each one guarded by its own god. But the heart is left inside the pharaoh's body as the center of feeling and thought. Now, Khufu is ready for his journey. His mummy is borne in state into the heart of the pyramid. Here, the pharaoh's body is laid in its final resting place, a massive sarcophagus carved from a single chunk of granite. Finally, the funeral cortege withdraws to the world of the living. But inside the pyramid, the dead pharaoh's body is not alone. In the silent heart of Khufu's Great Pyramid, a gang of workmen has stayed behind, and once the funeral is over, their work has only just begun. Each man wields a great wooden stake. They smash aside the beams that span the central passageway known as the Grand Gallery, bringing granite blocks crashing down. This was the pyramid engineer's specially designed security system. The blocks would slide down the gallery, creating a giant plug that blocked the entrance below. Here is the true purpose of this magnificent space. It was nothing but a parking space for these stone blocks. A similar technique seals the entrance to the burial chamber at the top of the gallery, where stone portcullises block the way. But this leaves the men trapped inside the gallery.
There is an assumption that in order to seal the pyramid properly with all these big granite boulders, you had to have people pushing from the inside as well as the outside so that people would have been sealed alive into the pyramid. I think that's a sort of nightmare scenario.
The idea that men were left to die inside the tomb is one of the pyramid's most chilling stories. But it's just a legend.
If there were bodies, of people who'd been shut inside the pyramid, there's no evidence for that now.
In fact, these men were not expected to die in the service of their king. They have a plan. Long ago, the builders had hacked a narrow passage through the stone, down to the underground chamber below. It's their escape route back to the outside world. The funeral is over, but for the ancient Egyptians, the magic of the pyramid is just beginning. Deep in its heart, a miracle is about to take place.
The pyramid occupies a kind of a magical, symbolic space that no longer relates just to Egypt itself. It relates to the pharaoh in his eternal aspect, and it's a place where the pharaoh becomes a god.
On the east and west walls of the inner chambers are two tiny shafts. For centuries, Egyptologists thought that these were air shafts. But in 1964, astronomers made an extraordinary discovery. One shaft is precisely aligned with the belt of Orion, the other with the northern pole star, as they appeared in ancient Egypt's night sky.
We know from the pyramid texts that both the circumpolar stars and Orion were important in the afterlife of the king, that he was believed to go and join those stars after he had died. And so what these shafts were for were to project the king's spirit out of the pyramid towards the stars. They were really launch pads to the afterlife.
To the ancient Egyptians, this was the entire purpose of the pyramid. The potent rituals, the precise planning and alignment, and 2 decades of toil all culminate in this single glorious moment. They believed the pharaoh's life spirit would rise like a phoenix from his grave. His reunited body and soul would soar up these shafts to rise above the pyramid on its great journey to the stars. The Great Pyramid was called Khufu's Horizon. It was a gateway into the next world, where Khufu would take his place among the gods and watch over his people forever. It remains the pinnacle of the great era of pyramid building. It's a monument to man's ambition and ingenuity, and to the triumph of the human spirit in the face of death.